The meeting of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group will now begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Andrea Rubenstein, and along with Commissioner Tony Newborn, I am one of the co-chairs of the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group, and I hope whoever's voice we hear can mute. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Kozak.
Here.
Commissioner Perry.
Here.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Here.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Present.
Chair Clegg. Commissioner Newborn. Chair Clegg. Commissioner Newborn. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Here.
There are 5 members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioners, the agenda for today's meeting is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion Sandberg.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Kozak.
Aye.
Commissioner Perry.
Aye.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Aye.
Chair Clegg.
Aye.
Commissioner Newborn. Commissioner Newborn. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Thank you. The motion passes and the agenda is adopted. I will note that Commissioner Newborn was delayed in a meeting and she will be here soon. Item 1 on the agenda is the chair's report, and I do not have a report. And so we will go to item number 2. And item number 2 on the agenda are the interviews of our invited guests to answer questions regarding the City Council's proposed charter amendment related to community safety and violence prevention. And I want to welcome the members of City Council who are here today. We're very grateful to you and honored that you are joining us and look forward to an interesting discussion. Our invited guests are the amendment co-authors, council members Jeremiah Ellison, Alondra Cano, Cam Gordon, Steve Fletcher, and Lisa Bender. And we also invited Council Member Cunningham, and thank you for being here as well. So I will go right into the questions, and I know that you've received them in advance. I apologize for the length and hope they won't be quite as lengthy as they seem. And we also want to leave room for other members of the commission to ask questions if they are so inclined. So I'll start with the first question. At the June 7th rally in Powderhorn Park, 9 council members standing on a stage that had a sign which stated defund police called for ending the Minneapolis Police Department. In a letter dated August 5, however, just prior to our vote on the amendment, 5 members of City Council stated that the council was not actually asking to submit a ballot question that would abolish the police, and specifically stated that you did, quote, envision a public safety system that includes law enforcement. This ambiguity has been a confusing aspect for the public, at least as it's been reflected in testimony we heard at hearings and also through our written comments that we received. Could you, and I want to mention, we haven't addressed any of these questions to any particular one of you. And so we welcome whoever wishes to answer these questions to answer them. So our first question is, could you clarify how you actually do perceive the role of law enforcement existing in the future under a new community safety and violence prevention department, and whether licensed police officers will be a part of that future vision?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Philippe Cunningham here, Chair of the Public Health and Safety Committee. I would like to speak to that if it's okay.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
So I just want to share that the approach that we have been discussing as a council is really looking at the entire cycle of someone's involvement with crime in the criminal justice system. So that includes prevention, intervention, enforcement, and reentry, which is supporting folks coming out of incarceration back into our community. That is based on the Office of, or the Department of Justice, their recommendation of a structure related to violence, sustainable violence in prevention and intervention. So within that, prevention is something we've already talked a lot about. Intervention is really thinking about when you're in the thick of a situation and how do you disrupt violence that is underway, or stopping retaliatory violence, for example. And enforcement is a role within that. We need to make sure that we have good law enforcement and that we are structuring it for success. But what we know, though, overall, is that when it comes to prevention, intervention, and reentry, that the government programs that are that have been social programs that have been investments in the underlying causes of crime and violence have been cut and cut and cut. And at the same time, the system of consequences, so the criminal justice system and law enforcement, their budgets have continued to increase. What we're talking about here is a comprehensive approach that right sizes law enforcement within prevention, intervention, enforcement, and reentry. So that is the work that we have been doing. And I will allow one of my other colleagues to be able to speak to that, but just wanted to give you that framework from which we are operating.
Thank you.
Hi, Commissioner Rubenstein. This is Councilmember Alondra Cano. I hope you can hear me okay.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us again. I'm going to put up my volume here so I can hear you all better. So I think to your question, it's important for me as one of the 5 co-authors of the Charter Amendment Initiative is that we did have very thorough, intentional, and thoughtful conversations about the language in the question that we forwarded to you all. And I think it's important for us to be transparent in that that specific question did have the language that stated that the City Council would be able to activate a law enforcement division or law enforcement services arm within the broader new public safety department shall the City Council choose to. So I believe the specific word we used was may instead of will. And I know that there were certain, there were a lot of conversations that we had around this specific language. And I think that some community members were disappointed in us including that terminology that allowed the City Council to have that authority, because they really didn't want the ability for the new department to institute or activate a law enforcement division component. And I think that that was probably the most significant point of divergence between the choice of the 5 co-authors and and some of the community-based groups who didn't want to see that be a part of the transition into a new safety system. So I just want to be clear that that was an intentional choice by the co-authors of the charter amendment. And I think that for a while now, I've been discussing this moment in time as a transition, which means we're neither in a world where we can sustain our old policing systems, and we're not in a new world where we are free of arrests and free of law enforcement personnel, simply because it's going to take more than a couple of months to get our entire society and the culture of violence to change to the new context. So I just wanted to provide some of that background and information, and again, point people to the specific language in the question that we forwarded to you all, which does include the ability to activate a law enforcement division component if and when the City Council wanted to.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from members of City Council?
Hi, Chair Rubenstein. This is Jeremiah Ellison. You know, I think that my colleagues really gave some great responses. I think that as I'm listening and as I listen to the question, I'm forced to wonder whether or not the question's being asked in good faith. With all due respect, I feel like the question's not being asked in good faith. I think that we had a lot of discussion early on about what the language of the charter was. I think that you all were gifted, I think, an immense amount of public hope with regards to people's desire or not to vote on the future of public safety in their city. And as I hear you sort of rewrite history and say, oh, there was this massive confusion about whether this amendment was intended to abolish the police, I mean, that makes me feel like the question's not being asked in good faith. Because at no point was that a part of what this language and what this charter change would represent. And so, you know, I'm happy to sit here and answer questions. I think that Councilmember Cano and Councilmember Cunningham gave some good responses. But if you're not going to ask questions in good faith, I have too much respect for your time and too much respect for my time to continue engaging.
Commissioner Garcia has her hand up.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. I think on that note, I can't speak for what questions are already in the queue to be asked, but I think now post our vote, it behooves the the residents of Minneapolis for the Charter Commission, City Council, and City staff to all act in good faith and to cooperate and to collaborate on behalf of the residents of Minneapolis. Coming together is the only way that we're all going to work together for the ultimate goal for the residents. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Garcia. There's somebody else, Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, as I understand the question, I think the short answer is yes.
Okay, thank you for answering the question.
And I will note that there's no way that one of us can speak for a consensus of the council. What you need to do is go back to where the votes were and what we voted on to find out where we were. And there certainly was unanimous consent on the charter language, as well as on some other resolutions that came forward. But for my opinion, that's the short answer. And the medium-sized answer.
Okay. If we are ready to move on to the next question, I think the second one has been answered regarding consensus, so I'll skip that. As part of your June 12th resolution on transforming the future of community safety, the council promised a year-long engagement process that would allow all stakeholders, as well as the general public, to have input on defining the future of community safety in Minneapolis. To date, it does not appear, at least to our, as outsiders, our eyes, that any outreach or engagement plan has been approved, or that the stated level of engagement and opportunity for input has occurred. What is the current plan for providing for that level of community involvement, education, engagement, and participation in transforming this important function of government, namely safety and violence prevention? Councilmember Cunningham.
Yes, I just wanted to share with the committee members that we will actually be getting an update on this exact question from city staff at this upcoming Thursday's Public Health and Safety Committee. So these questions will be answered by city staff in detail. And a part of that will include a council action approving a preliminary community engagement plan, while also discussing particular staffing infrastructure and capacity needs in order to be able to carry that out. So there will be that update to be able to answer that question more thoroughly from staff on Thursday at the Public Health and Safety Committee meeting.
Has there been a reason for the delay up to now?
I will allow my Councilmember Fletcher raised his hand, so I will defer to him.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein, and all the commissioners for having us, and Shana Tova. I am very happy, to have a chance to talk with you here. I will say, I just want to validate that it has taken longer for that process to get to a public phase than any of us envisioned. I think we're not happy with that outcome. We've been making some steps to work with staff to create a little bit of a different ownership structure for the process so that when it comes forward, it will move forward in a more expeditious way. I think it hit some internal barriers. This has been a hard summer for everybody. I'm certainly empathetic to the challenges of assigning a big project like this, but certainly when we gave the staff direction in June, it was my expectation that there would be more formal public feedback. I'll also note that there has been no lack of public engagement opportunity. Every single council member has been working in their wards, and in slightly different ways. It's been less uniform, it's been less formal, but certainly there has been a vibrant and energetic and highly participatory set of conversations going on all over the city that I think an awful lot of people have weighed in on. We certainly have a lot more to do to make sure that everybody is invited in, to make sure that everybody has access to that conversation. And that will be starting. I just want to validate, frankly, none of us are satisfied with how quickly it got out of the gate, and we're working to correct that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Connected to that, while this, and as you say, this engagement process has already been going on, even if not in a more formal way. Are there other policy changes that you are planning to present or have presented to the community for review and comment related to public safety, of course?
Can I just clarify the question? You mean
Sure.
other? You mean besides the charter amendment?
Right, or besides the the visioning for a new department, are there related policy issues that are coming up?
Certainly, there's the ongoing policy work that we were all engaged with. That'll continue working its way through. So as one example, I've been working on data privacy work, which has a relationship to surveillance and facial recognition technology and what kinds of military equipment is in use by MPD, and that's something that we're bringing through, in partnership with the ACLU. That was on my work plan long before this summer, and is something that that's continuing to move. There's all kinds of policy happening that has a relationship to public safety in some way. And then I think also the constituent feedback we've received it envisions solutions that go well beyond a typical public safety response. And so I think that a lot of the conversations about what will make you feel safe are also going to lead to policy change in public works, in IT, in lots of different departments that can all play a role in being part of the response in regulatory services and so on. And so I think that there's a lot of good opportunity. I see Councilmember Gordon also waiting.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Gordon?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot. I think it's actually taking a lot of our time and attention. So I've introduced ordinance amendments. One, the ordinance that governs the police department itself. Another that it governs police oversight. And there have begun discussions on those amendments. We have the 911 work group that's been working intensely on looking at 911 response and analyzing that data. We have the budget discussions, and budget is considered a policy discussion and documents. There were significant amendments made even to the 2020 budget. And certainly some of those had to do with community safety and public safety in the police department. You may have seen some of those in the news. There was an adjustment there to help build out a whole new program to address the issues of violence. We also had a very interesting engagement process, or lack of engagement, then super engagement, in a 3rd precinct relocation. So the precincts are the areas that the police are divided into covering, and they each have a station. One of those stations was destroyed during the civil unrest. Hopefully all of you know that. And we've looked at the relocation for that. So there's been a policy discussion over that, and ultimately a rejection. Somebody pulled out of the lease, but so that did not move forward. But so yes, and there's probably a lot more. I think Andrew Johnson, who's been very involved in the 911 work group, probably has more. I know that the council vice president is looking at doing more to create some kind of process for restorative justice or reconciliation. We are still dealing in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing, and there's a 38th in Chicago. We've renamed a street. Somebody might think that might have been some kind of policy decision. I don't know. The list probably goes on a lot longer. But the short answer to that one is, or was it, what ones are we working on? We are working on many.
Yes, thank you. Two that you mentioned are the police. You said you have introduced ordinances or amendments to govern the police department and oversight. Could you explain what those are? And then I know that Councilmember Cunningham would like to speak, but I just wanted to clarify that piece of what you just said.
Very briefly, in order to implement the city charter, we have a code of ordinances, and we have a code of, so the charter departments all have ordinances that govern them. And so I have introduced the subject matter, or what we like to say, opened up the police department ordinance. Part of this is to look at potential changes now, but also to be ready should have the charter amendment gone forward, so that we could flesh out kind of what aspects would be there of the department. So that's that one. Mostly, although it's, I suppose, fairly lengthy, but mostly what that does is points back to the charter and talks about how it's being implemented. The oversight ordinance talks about police oversight and mainly deals with work that's done out of the Civil Rights Department. That's, if you've heard of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, that was created by that ordinance. We used to have a civilian review authority, but it was also under that ordinance, and then it was changed. And we created two different things, the Police Conduct Oversight Commission and also a police conduct review panels. I think I have that name right. That it is a separate entity. So those are the things that I've opened, and I've already had some conversations with the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, both the staff that works on this and as well as the commission itself, but they're short members right now. But I think they started a work group to assist with that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cunningham?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add the work around the Office of Violence Prevention. Violence prevention work has been happening since 2006, and we have some work that is already underway, ranging from a hospital-based bedside intervention to help disrupt the immediate trauma that someone experiences from being a victim of a violent crime. It's for folks who under the age of 30 who have been shot or stabbed. And also interrupts retaliatory violence. So someone gets shot and then their family goes and shoots somebody else. So disrupting that process. We have that. We have the group violence intervention strategy that's underway. So, you know, these are evidence-based, science-based strategies that are having significant impact on the lives of those that the Office of Violence Prevention directly works with. And so, you know, the conversation still going forward is how do we scale up these strategies to be able to have the population level impact that we would like to see as a city. But that requires policy, budgetary conversations, structural conversations. And so there's that. And I also just want to speak briefly to any policy changes related to the police department. We actually do not, we do not have control over the mayor. So if he chooses to, you know, do a press conference announcing a policy change that is outside of what we're talking about here in terms of the community engagement process, that is within his authority and prerogative to do so. So but those are happening though outside of this process. Like the use of force policy has been changed, and there are some other policies that have been changed outside of this process. So just wanted to name that also is a reality that's happening, and it is happening outside of this formal process.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. The next question we've already, I think Councilmember Gordon has already touched on. The June 12th resolution also stated that the one-year process will, quote, center the role of healing and reconciliation, and that you would be working with, quote, again, local and national leaders on transformative justice in partnerships informed by the needs of every block in our city, unquote. So one question is, where are you in that process? And also, what do you mean by transformative justice? Councilmember Cunningham.
I apologize if I'm speaking too much. This is a bit of my jam, so I can't help it. So I will speak specifically to the local and national leaders on transformative justice. The wonderful leadership of Office of Violence Prevention Director Sasha Cotton. Since about 2015, we have had partnerships and relationships with national experts related to operationalizing a violence prevention approach. So we have relationships with the National Network for Safe Communities out of John Jay College. We also have a relationship with the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice. We have relationships with Cities United, which has an organizational goal of lowering the homicides of Black boys and men by 50% by 2025. We have relationships with the Prevention Institute out of Oakland. So we have a lot of amazing national experts who are all looking right now. We've already been working with them, and now they're super energized, ready to dive in and really dig into this work of building new systems of public safety that really are rooted in the public health approach to public safety. And we're fortunate because we do also have local experts. So folks like, we have folks here who are leading experts in, so for example, forensic psychology around children witnessing domestic violence. We have, you know, so it's like we also have, we're very blessed here to have national experts, but locally based, and can really put the big picture of the data, the science, around public health, around criminology into our local context. So that's really where we are. When we talk about transformative justice, that is thinking about justice outside of centering the system of consequences. So the criminal justice system as the main form of public safety. Instead, how are we taking folks who have entered into a life of crime and violence and gotten stuck in that cycle? How are we giving them true off-ramps so that we are building lasting peace? Justice as it's defined is really an equitable relationship between systems and the people that they serve. And transformative justice is really how are we creating a healing and restorative approach to actually building peace and equity. So I hope I didn't speak too high language there, but that's really where that comes from. But we are very fortunate as a city, thanks to the leadership of our previous mayor, as well as the leadership of our director of Office of Violence Prevention, for these really fundamental, powerful relationships that we have with others.
So as I'm understanding what you're saying, this is a focus on people who are in the criminal justice system. Councilmember Gordon also mentioned the work that Vice President Jenkins is doing with restorative justice, and I gather that's more of a focus on the victims of criminal violence.
So we are, so from my understanding of how all of this work is going to fit together is that there's really a discussion around a truth and reconciliation process, which is really about like racial healing. We as a system, granted I inherited it, we inherited it, but the reality is now we are, the leaders of this system have caused tremendous harm through structural violence, which is also another form of violence, through inequitable distribution of resources, as well as some tremendous harm caused by both the conundrum and paradox of over and under policing simultaneously and mass incarceration. That has been tremendous harm that has happened. So if we are unable to have a healing process around the trauma that has been caused, it is going to be very challenging for us to be able to have productive conversations about how then do we have systems that restore people, that do not perpetuate the harm that has been historically caused. So, so that is really what that realm of work is focusing on, is really the healing aspect. So it's not specifically victims. It is a broader victims of structural violence, which are marginalized communities.
Yeah, thank you for that. I would say our community as a whole has been grieving, so this would be part of it.
Absolutely. We have to create space for that healing process in order for us to move forward to solutions first.
Thank you. Not seeing any other comments. We already talked about, Councilmember Cano talked about the word may in the amendment. And we just had one question related to that. Your August 5th letter to the Charter Commission explained that the word may was meant to keep options open, and suggesting that one option might be contracting with another jurisdiction. I wonder if that or any other options have been explored at this point.
Certainly, informally, we've asked the question, and there's been significant changes in the way that we coordinate with other jurisdictions in relationship to responding to emergency situations. So those multi-jurisdictional relationships are happening. I'll say it's not something that we're pursuing as aggressively because this commission has run out the clock on the question, and so it's not an immediate option in front of us. So it's something that we'll take our time with. That timing's not available to us in a way that I frankly think would have been good from a policy perspective for us to be able to put on the table, both as a leverage point in negotiations and also as something that potentially really needed to happen. We are seeing a slowdown, it looks like, from the data. We've made a 5% budget cut, but we're seeing WCCO thought 38% less response. The Star Tribune thought 30% less police activity being recorded. And so if we are not actually able to get the response that we need from the current system and that we're paying for from the current system, the ability to negotiate with other jurisdictions and figure out ways to get coverage, feels like something that people should want the city to have. We might not be in a position where we can just pretend things are working. And I think that's, for me, is one of the regrettable things about the way that this has moved forward, is that I think that negotiation is something that, frankly, I don't know why another jurisdiction would spend a lot of time with us in that negotiation if they know that we're not empowered to do it. So it's a conversation that's been held up a bit by this process.
Commissioner Rubenstein, I'll just add, this is Councilmember Kano again. We do still have that thorough and robust process that was kicked off by the state of Minnesota through its human rights department. And so, I think that we will all continue to watch that process move forward, engage with it, participate in it publicly when invited to. And so I think that the results of that will be important to watch because they themselves, as a state institution, might make some requests of the city and of our police department specifically that we as council members may not be able to necessarily control or shape as much, but that might be a needed solution or an intervention for whatever the moment we may be when those findings and those directives come out. So I just wanted to remind commissioners and the general public that process is still underway, it's still active, and will likely be active for a long time.
Thank you. And I think we're all looking forward to that resolution. Was there another comment? Okay. I think we asked before, and I realize that we're going through the budget process now, so this question may be irrelevant at this point. But since the June 12th resolution, have there been any budgetary or fiscal impact analyses examining the proposal to create the new department? And if so, what are the recommendations? Councilmember Fletcher.
Thanks. I think given that our staff are very, very busy right now. And so we are attempting to get them doing an engagement process that's not going as fast as we want. We're trying to get a recovery process off the ground that's not going as fast as anyone wants, although there were some good announcements made this week. I think the challenge for us, so given that the Charter Commission chose to take its time and not move this forward as something that's going to happen this year, we have not prioritized that as something that we've asked staff to work on in a timely way. It'll certainly be in the workflow. It's the kind of thing that we need to look at. There are definitely financial considerations in the pro and con column for any kind of a change that you make in public safety. Policing is very expensive in a lot of the ways that it operates. But there is also certainly an inefficiency to having specialists assigned to everything and having to have a service level, for lots of different specializations as opposed to just like one big group of interchangeable workers, right? There's an efficiency to that. So we'll have to look at all of those things as we think about a fiscal impact and as we think about what that looks like. But no, that certainly hasn't been done yet because that's not one of the things that we can do in the next few months.
And as we understand it, that staffing efficiency study is something pending too. That's going to be helpful, I would imagine.
It certainly might be. I think that the language of that was probably written in a pre-COVID moment, and I hope that it, in retrospect, is asking the questions that we would actually need answered.
Thank you. A related question, and maybe it's too related, and maybe there's the same answer, but what about a racial impact analysis? Is that something that you've thought about, or what it might entail? Councilmember Fletcher and then Councilmember Cunningham.
Sure. We should certainly do a racial impact analysis on looking at any change. And I think one of the things driving the conversation about changing public safety is a racial impact analysis that the community has performed that finds us severely lacking in our approach to public safety as a part of the way our city has behaved for decades in relationship to that question. So I think we should, and we do, and in many ways we have accounted for what's the racial impact analysis of the current system, and then obviously we need to account for how we think it has a positive racial impact to make changes to our system.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon. Oh, sorry.
I had
Sorry.
lowered my hand. I did it too fast.
Oh.
Sorry. So I guess my question back would be like racial impact analysis of what? Specifically, is it of a new system of budgetary changes? Much to Councilmember Fletcher. Well, I see Commissioner Newborn maybe has a response to my question. If you would like for her to clarify a little bit for me.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Newborn.
Hi there. I actually had a question that I was going to ask in response, but I would just add to that question about a racial impact analysis, or racial equity impact analysis is what I would describe it as. Our Office of Race and Equity, the city's Office of Race and Equity, to add on to that question, has there been any partnership or relationship with that office to do some form of racial equity impact analysis on specifically the reform or how we're thinking about policing in the city? Like, how has an impact analysis been done on how to reshape the department? And I think that's kind of what we're getting to in our question.
So I'll just, add to Councilmember Fletcher's response of like, yes, everything that we do should have a racial equity impact analysis. I will say that the analysis that has been done thus far is very clear that the current system that we have is producing racially inequitable results. And so, as we're moving forward and we're getting more specifics through the iterative engagement process, as we're moving these different components, all of it would be a part of a racial equity impact analysis would be a part of it, because a major driver is the fact that our current system is producing racially inequitable outcomes, and that is unjust and something that we cannot tolerate on our watch as city leaders. So absolutely, that plays a role. The specifics of that are yet to be determined, though, about what would be operationalized.
Commissioner Rubenstein, I'll just add that Councilmember Gordon, myself, Councilmember Andrew Johnson, Councilmember Jamal Osman, as well as Councilmember Jenkins and Councilmember Schrader, who all represent the 3rd Precinct, have been really rolling up our sleeves to support that conversation outside of the city's greater work on reimagining public safety. Simply because this conversation about relocating the 3rd Precinct has really erupted and severely damaged relationships in the community and between council members, and caused a lot of harm and conflict because of the city's lack of support for that conversation publicly. So I'll say that as the council members who represent the 3rd Precinct, we have come together to put a series of action steps and a community engagement structure that we are working hand in hand with our neighbors and our residents and our grass tops leaders and our stakeholders, mostly around the Lake and Minnehaha area, to ensure that this discussion about what happens to the 3rd Precinct is actually a leading example of how we can problem solve and really address these issues. And as such, I will say that if Councilmember Gordon doesn't mind, me sharing that in those discussions and in the explicit values and requests that we as council members are looking at, it includes a racial equity impact analysis for the relocation of the 3rd precinct, which I think a lot of people know currently they're operating out of the Minneapolis Convention Center. In general, I think many council members and city staff understand that understand and support the 3rd precinct not being reinstated where it used to be in the building that was burned down there on the corner of Lake and Minnehaha. So I know that the conversation of a racial equity impact analysis has been alive and well in the conversations with us 5, 6, 7 council members that represent the 3rd precinct and that are really looking forward to putting some strong structure there to those to that effort because that unfortunately that conversation got out ahead of the year-long process of community engagement. And so for us, it's really important to bottom line that work and to really zero in on the restorative and healing steps that we are going to need in the coming days, weeks, and months, as we acknowledge that unjustly so, the very people who are disproportionately impacted by police brutality are also the very people who are suffering the most during this moment of transition, where Lake Street businesses are being robbed regularly and daily without any system to respond to them and to support them. We know of the stories of the folks who are having to sleep in their bathtubs and the elderly people who are immobilized in their front yards as gunshots and bullets are a regular occasion now in their neighborhood. And those things to me, you know, are serious in that it's not okay for community members to experience that, but it's also even more important that we don't normalize that level of gun violence and harm in our community, just to make a greater point about transforming our policing system. So I think that the racial equity impact will have to be very nuanced in that it must acknowledge the very complex realities of what it's going to take to fully transition our systems from what they were before Mr. Floyd was killed until what we hope they can be in the future in years down the line.
Thank you.
I wanted to maybe just add something to that. You're asking if we're considering the racial impact of changing our public safety system. Was that the question?
Essentially, because we're focusing on the amendment.
Sure. I think that, yeah, my colleagues have given some great answers. I think that the answer is yes, we're focused on what any sort of racial equity impact would be of a new system. But I also want to remind folks that this entire endeavor was sparked by a dramatic inequity of the current system. Dramatic inequity. And I'm not just talking about the murders, right? We focus on the murder of George Floyd or Jamar Clark, and we focus on Black people being killed by police, but we often sort of de-emphasize, a lot of the victims in the ketamine scandal were Black. A lot of the women who had their rape kits untested or don't get the kind of treatment they need from investigators are Black women. I think that the current system is devastatingly racially inequitable. And so I think that needs to be stated. I also think, just to give some context, we got a great presentation from the chief of police about a week ago, where he talked about the patrol levels are actually being really well maintained, partially because of his great leadership and moving some things around. So the patrol levels are being maintained. And we're getting a lot of help from other jurisdictions. We had the federal task force that was in operation for a while. And so we probably have been operating the last couple of months. I think the maybe tragically humorous thing is that we've been operating with a high level of policing infrastructure for the past couple of months, probably more so than we're used to. And yet we still have seen this rise in violence in our city. So not only does our current system create devastating outcomes, perpetuate devastating outcomes for communities of color, including death, but it also doesn't do a great job of preventing violence and crime from occurring in those same communities. And so I just think that that's important to contextualize that we've had a lot of police infrastructure operating in our city for the past couple of months because of the way that the chief of staff things and because of the fact that we've been getting external support from a lot of different jurisdictions.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon, you were going to say something. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. A couple of weeks ago, we had a presentation by the city attorneys. And according to the city attorneys, the city council maintains the same policy authority over the Minneapolis Police Department that it has over other departments. On the other hand, we're aware that the council has perceived a lack of policy control. And that, along with the minimum staffing levels in the charter, are further perceived as barriers to reform. Which of these 2 points is the more critical, in your opinion? Eliminating the barriers created by a mandated minimum staffing level, or transferring direct authority for the police department to the city council, and why? Councilmember Fletcher or Councilmember Gordon?
Steve, did you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay.
I'll go after you.
Well, I think they're both critically important, so I think that's a tough question to answer. I will say that back in 2018, and I've consistently probably been myself more concerned about the policy setting issue. I've also heard different things from different city attorneys. I still remember when the assistant city attorney told me when we did a staff direction for the police and they failed to respond to it, that I was informed when the council actually gave staff directions to the police chief, it was more like a request, and he pointed directly back to the charter provision that gives the mayor complete authority over it. Same thing happened when I wanted the council to approve the taser policy and their use of force policy. I was told the council doesn't have jurisdiction over that, and the city attorney pointed directly back to the charter provision that gives the mayor complete command and authority over the department. So I'm going to have to look at what you're parsing out to say that we have the same policymaking authority to see if it measures up. Because then I think it would be exciting to have us have a public hearing and a full discussion on the use of force policy and some other matters, and we could maybe test that again. I think presumably we could, if mayors always signed off on it, with police chiefs agreeing to it, which is what we did happen when we have an ordinance having to do with cooperation with ICE and federal authorities. So I think that I didn't, when I asked the for city attorneys' opinions, I've gotten different things. And I will confess to you that sometimes city attorneys are very risk averse. And so perhaps they're being more careful when they're doing something to you that's more public than they might otherwise. I also recall when we wanted to strengthen the civilian review authority and we were exploring having some discipline decisions that could operate outside the sphere of the police chief. The assistant city attorney at that time also said we absolutely couldn't do that and pointed directly back to the charter that says that all command of discipline and the authority over the department is vested in the mayor, and only the mayor can delegate that out. So I suppose the attorney could have been assuming a mayor could just give that authority to the council and operate under it. But it's never been the same as with other departments, where we will approve citywide policies, they will stand, and the council members will leave, the mayors will leave, and all the department heads will say, well, this is still our you name it, street lighting policy. This is the city policy. And now if you want to change that, you have to go back and talk about that. That's not the case with police department policies. In fact, we've had instances, I'll go back to the taser policy, when the entire policy was deleted from the policy manual 6 months after the funding was made available for the tasers and they were purchased, which was kind of a way that we could get when I wanted the council to actually approve that policy, but instead the chief agreed to the policy prior to the money being approved. And 6 months later, it was gone. And we were told, we've moved those into our training practices, but we didn't think it made sense being in the policy document, probably because of concerns about possible lawsuits or something. I'm not quite sure why they took them out, because there's no public process. If you pay attention to the way the city works, we have some pretty big things, Vision Zero policy, 2040 comprehensive plan, that go through this public transparent process, go through several committees, and then are approved by the council and signed by the mayor. You won't find those kind of policy discussions or that transparent process with police department policy. What you'll find, and I think maybe my colleague Philippe Cunningham said this earlier, you'll find a press release that gets announced when the use of force policy has now been changed and a phrase was added by the chief. And I think the only legal requirement is that it at least gets published and posted as an order from the chief. So I'm no lawyer. I do sometimes help write laws, but I don't know that that's the right interpretation of what the city attorney told you, or maybe the city attorney was missing something that past city attorneys have seen.
Thank you. I'll just mention that Councilmember Cunningham has written in the chat that he was told the same thing when he wanted to bring forward a staff direction involving the police department. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to recognize that the police department is not the same as other departments. So in general, there are things that we do as ordinance. There are things that we do as sort of guiding policy documents. And then there's day-to-day policy. And it is true that you would not want the city council involved in day-to-day policy. That there's an understanding in a division of labor that we empower staff based on a set of principles, based on a set of guiding ideas, to go make the day-to-day decisions. And we don't pick out which brand of paint Public Works paints the streets with. We tell them that they need to paint the streets, and often have a lot of conversations about that. But there is a level of detail that it wouldn't be efficient or useful or produce good results for us to govern at that level. The problem is that the police department does a lot of things in policy that are way more important than that. And they're the only department that I know of where the legislature actually calls out. The legislature writes laws that preempt city ordinance that refer to police policy. So, for example, use of force. There's a use of force policy at the state legislative level that says the chief will maintain a policy. That's actually in the legislative language. And so the city we can't, through the mechanism of ordinance, which is what's referenced often in conversations about the powers that the council has, actually intervene in that kind of a policy. I think people ask, for example, why didn't you just write an ordinance banning, so the council has, or the mayor has direct control over the police department, but why don't you just write an ordinance making it illegal for city employees to use chokeholds? That would apply to the police, right? Except that it wouldn't, and it would be absurd because right now, any other employee, if they were to use a chokehold, they'd already be breaking the law. We don't need to write a law for that. It's already against the law for someone from CPED to deploy a chokehold when they're in a conversation with somebody about a zoning issue. And so any ordinance that we pass would be duplicative of that, and at the same time, would be preempted by state law on the question of what force is available, because the use of force statute would override anything that we wrote as an ordinance and would refer down to the level of policy. So the ability of the city council to influence policy becomes much more important and much different in the context of a Minneapolis Police Department. And that's where the charter language is actually very important, is that there are critical public policy discussions that the public feels very engaged in, that are not the day-to-day operations of the department, but that are big, important, guiding principal issues that we get excluded from participating in by the way the charter is structured.
Are there, I'll call on Commissioner Newborn first, and then I had a question.
Thank you so much, Chair Rubenstein, and appreciate the council members for their responses to that. I'm wondering, for us who work in government or are affiliated with government, we may understand those nuances and differences between the day-to-day actions and discussions that the mayor is involved in as the presiding or supervising his staff, and how the council members would be involved if such an amendment were to take place and change. Could you describe in a little bit more detail, or anyone could describe in a little bit more detail, how would that distinction or that line be drawn between the day-to-day interactions of supervising an employee or an entire department versus what the council has intended or was intended to, as it relates to the reporting structure with the police department?
Sure, thank you for that. I think the goal really is that our relationship is to the police department the way it is for other departments. We do not manage the little day-to-day minutia of any of the departments, and it wouldn't make sense for us to as a legislative body. But we do set the guiding policy, and we do have public conversations that are transparent and available to the public about the guiding policy that informs the day-to-day decisions that we expect the people doing that work to make from the department head on down. And so I think it's very important. It is our view that our relationship to the Minneapolis Police Department is not the same as it is to other departments, and we would like to make it the same. We think that those other departments operate well and have a level of transparency about what's guiding their vision, what's guiding their mission, what's informing the practical decisions that they're making day to day, and that's the overall intent.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
Yeah, I think that Steve answered it pretty well, but if you can just think about how their interactions are with the fire department. And I know that sometimes, and I know that Tony happens to have more personal experience working for the city of Minneapolis than other people have. So I'm sure there are times when council members would like to be able to direct staff's work time and all of that, but really we operate through department heads, and that's how we should. And we can do staff directions through department heads, which I had one assistant city attorney tell me a staff direction to the police chief was actually a request because he answered to the mayor and not to the council because of the charter. But nevertheless, we do staff directions through department heads. And so that's really where we would interface, and we would set policy. There would be opportunities, I think, for those to be at different degrees and different levels, and there's different opportunities to influence those things, because we'll also do staff directions that could impact people. But really, it's at that higher level, and there isn't, we don't get to direct staff or evaluate individual staff. We kind of work in a very structured system, and more it's on the policy level where we set the policy and we approve the budgets. And one of the things we can't do is set policy for the police department. Now, we set some policy that we do because the city department comes and asks us to, and some people might think this isn't a level that we should be concerned about, but we have a street lighting policy, and the council discussed it. We had community engagement about it. We talked about it, and street lighting is really, really important to a lot of people, and we want some kind of uniform policy, and it costs a lot of money. It's a big thing that we do. So we have a policy that governs that and structures that, and that's the way that we interact with the departments.
Thank you. Commissioner Newborn?
Sorry about this. I have lots of questions. Thank you so much, Councilmember Gordon, for that response. I'm wondering if it's a matter of, you know, if not much would change between, you know, what you're doing now and how you're working with the other staff and departments across the city. Is it a matter of having a understanding or some level of a structure with the mayor's office? If the mayor's, if the department directors are reporting to the mayor, and currently as the charter stands, the mayor is authorized to provide direction and et cetera. Is there an opportunity for the council and the mayor's office to be aligned about how to work specifically with the police department?
Well, there's got to be an opportunity, but the way the charter is set up, if it ever comes to any difference of opinion, the mayor has full authority. I mean, if you just read that provision of it, has the command or whatever. I think the word command might be in there. I should pull it up so we could look at that language, but it's just very different. So there's not a need to cooperate. Often there isn't the desire to cooperate. And we can't even necessarily give the same kind of leverage with our staff directions that we can with other department heads to come and talk to us, because the mayor has the more exclusive authority baked right into the charter. So that, I think there is an opportunity to work together, and I think there would be a motivation for a mayor to want to include the council in more things, but I don't know that it ever goes there. And I think when the mayor looks at their role and their what they do, they really see that control of the police department as one of the things they want to hold on to. Because I've been rather surprised that no mayor has really been interested in modernizing that department like the rest of the departments so that they could be guided the same way we guide the fire department, the public works department, where we do it together. And so where it's not just kind of the concentrated interest that a mayor would be paying attention to when they're kind of thinking about their policy and their decisions, it would be a little bit more dispersed. So every area of the city would at least have more of a role to play in that, and say we can listen to council members, can listen to their constituents, and they can bring their opinion in, and then we can set the policy together and make those decisions. So I'm not sure how it can work under this charter, except by a very open mayor who's willing to kind of concede those decisions. And I'm not sure that there is one that will necessarily do that because of the way it's set up. So it's a good question. I think the easiest way to do it would just be to look at how the other departments are structured and to say we're going to structure this one in the city like that too, so that at least that there can be more representation that boils up in terms of policy making, just like we would with the fire department. And then we can also do that making policy about the police department.
Commissioner Newborn, did you want to ask further questions, or shall we turn first to Councilmember Cunningham?
No other questions. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Could I bring up one little interesting turn of events that happened recently? We were, I think even in terms of giving budget direction, it's more challenging with the police department than other departments, because we've seen how we can approve something that we think is clearly we're approving something for one particular purpose, and then the money never actually goes to that, and it's just moved within the department. And basically, I think we were told recently, correct me colleagues if I'm wrong, but by the city attorney that once the budget's approved in its entirety, the police department can shift it around where they would like, and the council can't necessarily restrict it. And I'm not quite sure how far we get with other departments, but we can give staff directions and those department heads take them much more seriously, or to implement them, I would say, in my experience, because they feel like it's their supervisors have now given them this direction. With the police department, it's different. In fact, sometimes it feels more like the bothersome council is trying to meddle in our stuff. Now that's maybe being a little flippant, but that's seriously sometimes what happens.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Newborn, for the question. I would add that cooperation amongst elected officials is always preferred. Whenever there's sort of like a dueling energy, it's just much harder to govern overall. One of the things, though, is that hoping for collaboration and much to Council Member Gordon's point around giving up some of the power over the police department from the perspective of the mayor, that's really personality based. So it really depends on the personality of the council members, individual council members, how the personality of the body, how it behaves as a whole, as well as the personality of the mayor. And in policymaking, it's just very important to make sure that we are not making policy and trying to govern from a personality perspective, but from good structured government. And so that's a part of the reason why, we're looking at setting up this department to function similarly. The mayor is still the executive and the council is still the legislative branch. We still have those division of governing authority, and it doesn't have to rely on the hope that there are the right mix of personalities in order to be able to govern from that, from the executive and the legislative branch perspective and approach. So I just wanted to kind of we always, I'll speak for myself instead of we. I always think that collaboration and cooperation amongst elected officials produces good outcomes. Governing without drama, it's hard to do, but it is preferred, because it's a little bit smoother. But it also is very personality based. So, we want to make sure that we have good structure, policy in place so that no matter who is the mayor, who is the council president, who are the council members, that there is consistency rather than having to rely on personality. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councilmember Ellison?
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Newborn, if you could help clarify something for me, it does sound like there might be a little bit of confusion baked into your question itself. It sounds like you're asking if the mayor gives us permission to give direction to the other departments. And I was wondering if you understood the difference between how the police are structured versus how the other departments are structured. Because it sounded like maybe you felt like all the departments were structured the same, but that simply the mayor just picked the police to hold on, have a tighter grip on.
Yep. No, I'm fully aware of the structure. I used to work for the city of Minneapolis. So no, that wasn't my question.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I was gonna walk through explaining all the difference, but it sounds like you understand the difference, so I'll refrain. But thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Newborn, you had other questions as well?
No, I'm good for now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, I know that we're starting to run out of time. I wanted to open it. I have a couple more questions, but I wanted to open it to other members of the Charter Commission in case they have questions. No? Okay, Chair Clegg.
Thank you. Anyone can answer this, but can you tell us what public safety related changes in state law the council may want to prioritize as the city's legislative priorities for 2021 and beyond, and what charter changes, if any, would be appropriate or desirable in conforming the charter to these priorities?
Thanks for that question. So I think that in many ways the document that Bert Osborne provided had the very comprehensive list of an awful lot of places where licensed peace officers are referenced in law in a way that is not necessarily useful or helpful or necessary. And so I think that there's a lot of options, and certainly having that catalog, even if I disagree with some of the ways that Mr. Osborne concluded that we currently need peace officers because of the way that some of those laws are written. I think it's not as clear as that. So I don't accept the premise, but I do accept that that's a useful to-do list as one thing that we've been able to provide the legislature as a part of the work product moving forward. And that's, I know, something that we had asked for quite some time ago, and I'm happy we were able to generate. I would say that there are several things that are on our legislative agenda that feel important. We've seen a real gap in traffic enforcement. I think the opportunity to reconsider the way we do traffic enforcement, including potentially automated camera-based traffic enforcement, is something that we want to work with the legislature on. That's already in our IGR agenda. I certainly think that there are opportunities to expand the ability of 911 dispatch to dispatch specialists more freely and with fewer restrictions so that we can make better decisions as a municipality about what the best way is to respond to incidents in our city. And I think that there's an opportunity for the state to work with us on that. And, I know that we have a robust IGR agenda that that we'll continue to work on as we move forward. I don't think that any of those changes in particular are suggestive of charter changes to my knowledge, but I'd be curious if any of my colleagues can think of any in response to the second part of the question.
I don't, Chair Clegg?
Yes.
Your hand, that's
Oh,
not your
sorry.
hand up again. Okay.
My hand is down. Sorry.
I don't see any of your colleagues, Councilmember Fletcher, but I do see that Commissioner Schwarzkopf has a question.
Madam Chair, the question that I have is that now that the negotiations are going on the police contract, and if it is a problem in the police contract as to how to discipline, or for the chief to discipline people, are we negotiating whatever we need to out of the contract so that that can be handled by the chief better in the future?
I'm happy to speak a little bit to it, but Steve, yeah. One of the downfalls of contract negotiation is that we don't have a ton of leverage, because if the old contract allows a lot of leeway and wasn't a great contract, then it stays in effect while we do the negotiation. And sometimes the negotiations can last years and years and years. I think that we're in a position where somewhere along the line, I'd probably have to. I'm sure somebody could find the exact point in history, but somewhere along the line, I think that we developed a bad contract with our police department, and what that means is that for us to try to go back, strengthen it, we're doing so with very little leverage, I think, and so absolutely, I think a lot of us have recognized the issue with the arbitration process that says when the police chief fires someone, our arbitration process essentially says they're getting it wrong 50% of the time. Do we necessarily think that Rondo's getting it wrong 50% of the time when he fires someone? I surely don't think so. But our arbitration process says yes, he is, because we reinstate 50% of the officers that are around 50% of the officers that we fire. And so obviously we're not going to approve a contract, at least not this council, or not. I'll speak for myself. I would not vote in favor of any contract that doesn't strengthen our ability to hold officers accountable. But I also have to say that, acknowledging the fact that we have very little leverage given the current state of the police union contract, and I think that it might require some level of state intervention, or at least cleverness, to really rein things back in.
Thank you. I know that Council Member Fletcher wants to add a comment, but I just wanted to add something as well. I've spoken to labor arbitrators and other experts in the field, and I used to be an employment lawyer, so I know a little bit about employment law. And I understand that one reason that the arbitration decisions have gone the way they go is because if in the past the police department or the system did not discipline somebody to a certain level, that they couldn't do it later on. But I also understand that past practices can be changed by agreement. It can be agreed. We're not going to rely on this as a past practice anymore. And it seems to me that that's something that is within the jurisdiction of the city council and in the negotiations or of the city and city management. And since Council Member Fletcher, you're at least nodding, and you were going to speak anyway, I'd call on you.
Great. Well, so you're correct that past practices can be negotiated, and you're correct that all kinds of discipline issues can be negotiated. It's also worth pointing out that not every union defends every member for every offense, no matter how egregious. It is a choice, a value-based choice that the Police Federation makes to defend people for doing really awful, indefensible things, and it's reprehensible. What I do want to say, though, is we have extremely limited leverage. We've basically identified that there are three major structural barriers that prevent us from making significant changes in public safety. Those three major barriers are state law, the Minneapolis City Charter, which is what we're discussing here today, and the Police Federation contract. And now if you think about the Police Federation contract, think about the position that we're in when we go to negotiate that. We are required to have a police department under charter, and we are required to have a minimum staffing level. So we can't make a credible threat of making any kind of structural change. So when we're at the table, they know we can't walk away and not have them. We don't have a choice to go negotiate some other way of providing for public safety. We don't have choices to fire everybody and fresh start. There's a whole lot of things that, frankly, we would like to have under our power, but given the structure of labor law and given the structure of a charter that really back us collectively into a corner, when we get to the Federation contract, we're not sitting there with a lot of leverage. The other thing that takes away our leverage, by the way, is that they operate under the old contract until we negotiate a new contract. So I feel fairly confident. If I was them, my strategy would be looking at this council and knowing that we will not sign something that doesn't solve some of the significant problems in public safety. I think that they're looking at this and saying, we probably don't feel like we're in a negotiating mood in real good faith until after the 2021 elections. I think if I was them, I would slow play it and see if we get a council that would sign off on some of the things that they want. I certainly hope that they don't, but I think that they don't have any obligation. I will finish my first term having never had a chance to vote on a police union contract. So that hasn't been a point of leverage for anybody who got elected in this term. And I think it's important to note that part of why we wanted the charter change, part of why we wanted a charter that allowed us to say, you know, if we really can't get the outcomes that we need from you, if this is really a department that's going to behave in a harmful way and not let us do anything about it and not work with us to solve these problems, we will shrink the department and we will find other ways to solve these problems. We need a credible way to say that. I don't know how we would negotiate a better contract unless we have that. And that's really what, by deciding to drag this out and by deciding to not act in a timely way, that's really what the Charter Commission did in terms of the current state of labor negotiations. So absolutely, in answer to your question, Commissioner Schwarzkopf, we are committed to not signing a contract that doesn't solve these problems. And I think everybody knows that. I think it's very clear. I have major problems, not only with the discipline issues, but with the way that the contract ties the chief's hands about how assignments are made. I think it's very, very, very important that we be able to put people in roles that we think are appropriate and not be tied to 70% of the roles being biddable, et cetera. So I think there's very, very important issues that have to be changed in the contract. And I just, without some more systems change, it's not an accident that the Federation lobbied and campaigned for the 1961 amendment that got us the minimum, right? Because that really is something that deflated the city's leverage in negotiations with them ever since. So that was a smart tactic back then. Kudos to the organizers who thought of it in 1961. We got beat, and it's time for the city to finally go win.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gordon. Okay. I see. Well, maybe your hand's not up. I note that Commissioner Perry asked if we could get a copy of the legislative agenda, and Councilmember Gordon has provided a link to obtain that. Another question. Well, I think this question has at least in part been answered, but it may be worth answering it again. What, if anything, would you offer from your perspective and experience that you think would be important for the Charter Commission to consider as it evaluates the current proposed amendment submitted by City Council? And I know there's been a lot of discussion already about the minimum funding requirement and the oversight, but I wonder if there are other things that you've now identified that might be of interest to us in the Charter Commission as we continue working on the amendment. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubenstein. I think it's important to note that it might actually not be important. That probably this conversation between the council and the Charter Commission is not what's going to produce the language that ends up on the ballot next year. That I think at this point, what is likely to happen is that rather than a few of us coming together to work this out among the folks on this call, I think a whole lot of people are going to come together to do a petition drive. And the language that they determine is appropriate to bring forward is really, I think, the language that we're going to end up discussing next year. So I would not encourage you. I would not want to say that there are things that you can work on with this body that feel important right now, because I think that actually what we're going to end up discussing, I would say focus on doing whatever due diligence you feel like you will need in advance of probably a petition-based charter proposal coming forward early next year, knowing that it'll come through in time to get on the ballot without delay next time. And I would just, really say if you think you've got a novel approach that might be something different than what we came up with that you want to make a public case for, so that the advocates who are coming together by the thousands to do that kind of a petition drive have the benefit of those ideas, I think that's certainly something that could feel important. But I don't want to pretend like this negotiation or this conversation is important to producing language, because I don't actually think that's where we are in the process. I think that effectively, having run out of the clock on the potential of the 2020 amendment, we probably have put it in the people's hands for early 2021, and I think that's probably fine with me. I think that's where the conversation is going, is that it's going to be a much broader group of people coming together to work on this, as it should be. This is going to be a big community conversation, and that's where I expect it to go. So I would focus your energy in terms of where you go with this, on what you think might be able to provide some prompts or ideas to a broader public that's contemplating a charter amendment by petition.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay, I think we've come to the end of our discussion. I just want to ask Commissioner Newborn if there's anything else you want to add or ask before we sign off.
Commissioner Rubenstein and Chair Rubenstein, thank you so much for that opportunity. And I just want to say thank you. I know I arrived a little bit late, but thank you to our council members for coming to this meeting and talking with us. I understand a lot of things have happened over the last 3 months, and we all have different opinions about what the process is and what should have happened and what should not have happened during this. But I really appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion with you without cameras and media involved, and be able to talk about this issue, knowing that we have different perspectives and different opinions about it. And so I think all of us have that interest in ensuring that within our respective roles that we are, working on behalf of the residents here in Minneapolis, and the Charter Commission being residents as well, and have an interest and a stake in seeing that that our city be successful, and how we reimagine public safety in our city. So I really appreciate the conversation. I really appreciate your participation in this. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Newborn. Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for the invitation, and I know this is the second time we've been invited at least to one form or another of the commission, and your work on this. I really appreciate that you're concerned and that you care about it and that you want to hear from us and understand it better. It's probably going to take all of us working together to figure this out and make sure that we can improve public safety in Minneapolis so that it benefits everybody and we can avoid the killings that we've seen in the past. So thanks for your time and for facilitating such a good meeting, and I appreciate being here. And welcome an invitation in the future as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I would add my thanks to all of you for a very interesting and informative meeting. I think we are all on the same page when it comes to not only an interest, but a passion in changing the direction that the city has been going in. And we as a Charter Commission are certainly intending to keep working on that. Item 3, the last item on the agenda, is a discussion of next steps for the Public Safety Work Group. And I'll just mention that next week we will be meeting with the mayor and the police chief again. And following that, we will be meeting with people in the Office of Racial Equity, as well as the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So we've got more meetings and more work to do. With that, we have concluded all business before the Charter Commission's Public Safety Work Group. And without objection, we stand adjourned.